Hello again, Gary Stearman with another edition of Prophecy in the News. Today we have a very special program for you. We're going to discuss J.R. Church's brand new book, Bloodline of the Antichrist. And we have a very special treat today. Not only are we going to introduce J.R.'s new book, but I'm going to introduce J.R. Church right now. And welcome back, J.R. It's good to have you on the set.
Thanks, Gary. It's good to be here. I'm not quite ready to get back in this, climb back in the saddle again, but at least I wanted to come and talk about the new book. Daniel reveals the bloodline of the Antichrist. It's a fascinating study, 330 pages. You'll love it. And we want to talk about it on today's program.
Well, J.R., you and I have had many conversations over the years concerning Daniel's prophecy. We've done videos, we've done long series in which we investigated the fine points of Daniel the prophet, but you've gone one step further with this book. Not only have you refined your analysis of Daniel the prophet, but this book has an exquisitely fine-tuned timeline in it. So we can not only see Daniel's prophecy, but we can place it within a timeline.
Yes. Daniel reveals the times of the Gentiles. And so because of that, I have a chart of 6,000 years in this book. It has 49 years in each column, 2 columns to a page, and right at the top of each column is the Jubilee. And so everything fits absolutely perfectly. It is an incredible study, and I want you to get it. This is the chart in the back of the book, and Gary, it starts out with creation and goes all the way through the year 2240. What the Jews claim will be their year 6000. Wow. Let's start with the first verse in Daniel, because Daniel intricately introduces the Antichrist. It's called the little horn. Well, let's go to chapter 2 and verse 43 for the beginning of this bloodline. Starting
at the beginning. And by the way, the setting here in Daniel chapter 2 is Nebuchadnezzar has a dream about a great statue. He doesn't understand the dream. And finally Daniel is called in to interpret the dream. And you're probably very familiar with the fact this statue has different parts going down to feet and 10 toes. And Daniel 2:43 speaks about those toes. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Well, there's a lot there, J.R.
Oh, that's genetic manipulation by the fallen angels. It's got to be, Gary.
Yeah.
This is the seed of the serpent. And so Daniel starts out right at the beginning of his book to talk about this end-time scenario when the seed of the serpent, shall we say demon seed, is going to be introduced as the Savior of the world, the Messiah figure. He is the Antichrist.
Well, Jesus himself said in the Olivet Discourse, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. And we've talked a lot about that lately. The fact that fallen angels mingled their bloodline with men before the flood. Jesus said it's going to happen again in the end of days. Are we there? Are we talking about those days?
Well, you know, he's talking about 10 toes.
Yeah.
And he's gone through the legs of iron.
Right.
We're now in the feet of iron and clay, and the 10 toes. The 10 toes are very short. Toes are short. They're not as long as fingers, which says to me that it's only going to last for a short time. I think 3.5 years. When these 10 toes are introduced, they are 10 kingdoms. That is 10 political regions of the world. The world is going to be divided up into 10 political economic regions, And the men who are set at the head of each one of these will be personally appointed by the Antichrist, and the Antichrist then will reign over them. And he's going to have problems with them right at the very beginning, so he's going to have to get rid of 3 of them.
And Daniel's prophecy suggests, by the way, that these men who set this kingdom up will think, or at least they will imagine, that their kingdom will last for 1,000 years. But they very quickly find out that the iron and the clay will not stay mixed. Everything begins to break up and fragment.
Yes. And the very fact that the angels have produced a human, the seed of Satan himself, the devil himself, has incarnated, just like God, well, not just like, but in a sense, as God was incarnated in Jesus, as God produced Jesus in the womb of a virgin, I believe the Antichrist will be produced in the womb of a harlot.
In other words, he's doing what he always does, counterfeiting the real thing.
Yes.
That's about all he ever does.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth?
It is.
So when we get to chapter 7 of Daniel, we've got him in the Roman Empire. It looks like this little horn comes out of the Roman Empire. But when we get to chapter 8, it looks like he's coming out of the Greek Empire. We get to chapter 9, he's coming out of the Roman Empire. We get to chapter 10, he's coming out of the Greek Empire. So what we've got here, Gary, are the roots of the Antichrist in the Greco-Roman royalty.
Absolutely. And by the way, we're going to go into some depth and detail about that, but let's just stop for a moment here on the 7th chapter, because the 7th chapter talks about 4 beasts and 4 beast empires. And you know, it's very common for Christians, and particularly when they're speaking about prophecy, it's very common for them to speak about the revived Roman Empire.
Yes.
And we certainly do believe in the revived Roman Empire in a sense, but maybe not in quite the same sense some other people do.
Right. You know, it's always been thought of as the Roman Empire revived, but it's going to be a world kingdom set up by, shall we say, the United Nations, which has the infrastructure right now to do that if it was just given the sovereignty to do it. And it could very easily then set up 10 regions. The European Union is a region.
Yes.
And North and Central and South America, or Canada, America, and Mexico could be a region.
Yes.
And then South America, all of those nations down there could be a region. And these are actually being set up, the Mediterranean region and so on. They are being set up, and it looks like there's going to be 10 of them. And this was introduced, by the way, by the Club of Rome back in 1974. They suggested to the UN that the world be divided up into 10 kingdoms. They used the word kingdom at first, but then realizing that wasn't politically correct, they changed it to 10 economic political regions.
And I'm glad you said economic, because if we look at what's happening today in global economics, it's obvious that there are some people pulling strings at the global level, and they are debasing the dollar. They're juggling currencies to create a parity worldwide in preparation for this global economic empire you're talking about.
Yes, well, that means then that the Antichrist is coming soon, doesn't it?
It does. Yes,
that he's just somewhere, maybe alive today on the world stage, ready to rise to prominence. Don't know exactly how he will do that, but I'm thinking that he will head up the United Nations.
It makes sense that he would, and he would have to be welcomed by the people of the United Nations as a kind of a savior.
Yes.
And that's easy to see.
And by the way, Ahmadinejad would not make it to the head of the UN.
No.
All right? Osama bin Laden would not make it to the head of the UN.
Not at all.
I don't know of a single Arab chieftain or ruler that would be welcomed to head up the United Nations. So my thinking is the Antichrist will not be Islamic. The Antichrist, according to Daniel, will come out of the Greco-Roman royalty.
And by the way, he really says it. And when we get to chapter 9, we'll talk about that. Daniel just absolutely nails the genealogy.
Yeah, he talks about the people of the prince that shall come.
He certainly does.
And that's the Romans that destroyed the temple in AD 70.
The fourth beast empire, Daniel 7:7. After this I saw in the night visions, behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, strong exceedingly. It had great iron teeth that devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. It was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So this is what you've just been talking about. The fourth beast doesn't look like any kind of a beast you can imagine. It's a dreadful monstrosity.
Yes.
And it has a little horn. I considered the horns, behold, there came up among them another little horn. And this, a horn is a symbol of power in the Bible, but it's also organic. It sort of grows out.
If you recall, the Persian emperor wore a helmet with ram's horns coming out of it. Mm-hmm. All right? And this was typical of many of the potentates in the early civilizations. They didn't wear a royal golden crown. They wore some kind of headdress, more like Indians wear lots of feathers, the
right.
Indian chief. So not everybody was adept to accepting a golden crown or a crown made out of metal with spigots. But when the crown did come along, it had these spigots, which were typical of the horns.
Mm-hmm. A horn, a symbol of power.
Yes.
Well, J.R., we have one of the great verses in the whole Bible, Daniel 7:9. I beheld till the thrones were cast down. The Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was like fiery flame, and his wheels of burning fire. This speaks of the judgment in the days of those kings. So
yes.
you have the kings setting up their kingdom, and then you have the judgment.
Yes.
And so this now sets the stage for everything we're going to be talking about.
Yes, and when we get to the next chapter and see the goat, we are told that it's Greece, that the Prince of Greece will come.
Right.
And we know that to be Alexander the Great. And out of it then rises this little horn when the kingdom is divided. The horn is broken. The kingdom is divided, and out of one of those horns rises this little horn. The same little horn that we saw in the previous chapter, but now he's coming out of the Greek Empire. So we've got the Antichrist coming out of Rome in chapter 7, out of Greece in chapter 8, and in chapter 9 he's coming out of Rome again.
Yeah.
And in chapter 10 he comes out of Greece with Antiochus Epiphanes, one of the generals that takes Babylon and Syria, and he has a royal house as the kingdom of the Greeks is split up into 4 kingdoms. And so we can see this Antichrist coming out of these royal houses. But Gary, in order to fit the Romans and the Greeks together, we have to understand that the Spartans had a split. One of their cousins got angry at what was going on among the Spartans. They were the people of southern Greece, all right? And he took his family and moved north across the Aegean Sea over to the isthmus between the Black Sea and the Aegean Sea, and set up a new kingdom, a city called Troy and the Trojan Empire. And it was Aeneas of the royal house of the Trojans that escaped the burning of Troy after a 10-year war between the Spartans and the Trojans, cousin against cousin. He went over to central Italy, and from him came Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome. And so the Roman Empire came out of the Spartans. The royalty of Rome were Spartan. And the royalty of Greece was Spartan.
Yes.
And the Spartans, before they called themselves Spartans, were known as Danaans. Look at Homer's Iliad.
Mm-hmm.
Homer calls them Danaans.
Absolutely.
And he says that a fellow named Danaus came with his 50 daughters
Mm-hmm.
from Phoenicia. Well, Gary, that's where the Danites live.
Absolutely. In fact, J.R., the Danites were a very peculiar bunch of people who refused their land grant, and they migrated north into northern Israel. They decided they didn't want to live there. They migrated farther north, and they finally migrated all the way over to Greece. And by the way, this is documented historically, and even in the histories of the Jews.
Yeah. Well, you recall Samson and his fight with the Philistines. He was a Danite who tried to capture the territory that was supposed to go to the Danites. But the Philistines were squatting on the territory. That's the Gaza Strip, where the Philistines still are to this day, by the way.
Yes.
But it was kind of sandy and not really good land, so yes, they ended up moving north, up north of the Jordan, at the headwaters of the Jordan River, above the Sea of Galilee. And that was beautiful country up there, Gary, with all those pine trees and the cedars of Lebanon. But eventually, they moved and disappeared. 1,050 years BC, they disappeared. And I believe they showed up in Sparta.
They did, and in fact, in the books of the Maccabees, a historical transaction and a letter preserved in history actually proves that they still considered themselves to be of the tribe of Dan much, much later.
Yes.
Close to the time of Christ.
And this letter is also mentioned in Josephus, the first century Jewish historian.
Mm-hmm.
So we got it in the Maccabees and also in Josephus, where the king of the Spartans writes a letter to the high priest in Jerusalem and says, hey, we found this document that says that we are of the stock of Abraham, that we are brethren with you guys. Is this true? And the high priest writes back and says, yes, it is true, and we pray for you on our holy feast days as becometh brethren.
Wow.
So the Spartans were of the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I believe they, because of Homer's Iliad, their name being Danaans, they were the Danites who disappeared. They were the only lost tribe, according to the rabbis. The tribe of Dan's the only real lost tribe in history.
And yet they have a destiny. And King Philip, his son Alexander the Great, then, J.R., must have fallen into the genealogy you're describing.
Yes.
Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great was a Danite. He was of Danite lineage. And his mother told him before he went on this rampage, to destroy Persia, she told him, your father is not Philip. Your father is Zeus, Amun.
Wow.
A snake. And it's actually in Greek history that Philip looked through a keyhole, spying on his wife in bed, and found a snake beside her. And he went to Delphi and asked the oracle of Delphi, what does this mean? And they explained it to him that this was Zeus Amun, the god. It's the seed of the serpent, Gary.
The seed of the serpent, absolutely. And there it is in Greek history, of all places, which, by the way, tells me why we have right here in Daniel a Greek section right alongside the Roman section. Mm-hmm. Daniel is subtly trying to tell us, when you talk about the genealogy of the Antichrist, or to use the title of J.R.'s book, The Bloodline of the Antichrist, you have to look to the Greco-Roman dynasties, because there is a pattern to be seen there.
Yes. So, the Antichrist is going to be an Israelite. You see, when Moses chose the two men to do the design work for the building of the tabernacle in the wilderness, he chose a man from the tribe of Judah, and he chose a man from the tribe of Dan. Dan and Judah worked together to build the tabernacle. And when we get over to, let's say, Herod's temple, we find the Danite symbol of an eagle sitting right over the door of the temple. I mean, the Danites want that temple. And the Antichrist from the tribe of the eagle is going to come and commit the abomination of desolation and lay his claim to the temple after Judah puts it out and gets it all ready.
J.R., it's amazing how quickly time goes by. Our time is fleeting, but I wanted to read this key prophecy, and we won't have time to complete it, but we're going to make another program, folks, so we're not going to leave you hanging, as it were. In Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, Daniel writes, "After 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined." This key prophecy mentions the people of the prince that shall come. Who are those people?
They are the Romans who destroyed the temple in AD 70. It's just as plain as the nose on your face. The Antichrist is coming out of Roman royalty.
And yet it's a little bit more complicated than that, because a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, if he's Roman, he can't be of the tribe of Dan. How in the world do you put that all together?
Well, the Roman royalty goes back to Aeneas, who was a Spartan, a Danite.
Okay.
And Greek royalty goes back to the Spartans who populated southern Greece.
And furthermore, and we've documented this many times in our magazine, Prophecy in the News, we've done studies on the Seleucid kings who came out of Alexander's household. And J.R., the Seleucid kings were also Danites.
Yes, they were.
And they intermarried with Roman royals.
You find them in the Senate, the Roman Senate. In fact, the man who recommended Nero to be voted on as the new emperor of the Roman Empire was a Seleucid.
Wow. Well, we have a way to go in Daniel, and on our next broadcast we're going to talk about the vision of the heavenly messenger. We're going to talk about Persian rule. We're going to talk about the Greco-Roman bloodline as Daniel lays it out toward the end of his book. And we've got a long way to go, and it's going to be very, very interesting, so be sure and plan to catch the next edition of Prophecy in the News. I'm Gary Stearman. And because JR is here on this special day, I'm just going to let him take about the last 30 seconds and say farewell to all our audience.
Well, let me tell you, if you don't know Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, He's the only one that can save you. Muhammad cannot save you. Allah cannot save you. Mohammedanism, Hinduism, none of the religions of the world can save you. Only Jesus. So trust in Him. Ask Him to forgive you and save you. He will, you know. He loves you. I'm J.R. Church with Gary Stearman. Until next time, keep looking up.
Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For your gift of $10, you can receive a special edition of our current program on an audio CD, or for a gift of $20, we'll send you our programs on DVD videos. For either order, call the 800 number on your screen right now.